The air was thick with the scent of blooming cherries and the hum of 1,000 futures colliding. Ethan stood frozen, his graduation cap clutched too tightly in his trembling hands, as Caleb's green eyes burned into him from across the park. In that single, shattering moment, Ethan knew he'd either confess his love or carry the weight of it to his grave. It was June in New York City, 2019, and Washington Square Park pulsed with the chaos of NYU's graduation day. Gowns swished, families cheered, and cameras flashed. But for Ethan Parker, the world had narrowed to one person. Caleb Nguyen, his best friend since freshman year, stood just 10 feet away, laughing with a group of classmates. His sharp jawline caught the sunlight, and Ethan's chest ached with the secret he'd buried for 4 years. They'd shared late-night study sessions, impromptu pizza runs, and dreams of conquering the world. Ethan as a playwright, Caleb as a lawyer. But Ethan had never dared to speak the truth. He was in love with Caleb, a love so fierce it felt like ruin. "Ethan, you good?" Caleb's voice cut through the noise, his brow furrowing as he broke away from the group. Ethan's heart lurched. This was the moment he'd rehearsed in his dorm room mirror 100 times. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck, heavy as lead. "I need to tell you something," Ethan managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb tilted his head, curious, and stepped closer. The park seemed to quiet, the world holding its breath. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. "Caleb, I've been in love with you since the day we met. I know you don't feel the same, but I had to say it before we leave this place." Caleb's face froze, his green eyes widening. For a fleeting second, Ethan thought he saw something shock, maybe regret flicker in those eyes. But then Caleb's expression hardened, and he took a step back. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." The silence that followed was a knife. Ethan's confession hung between them, raw and exposed, and Caleb's hesitation carved it deeper. Ethan forced a smile, his heart splintering. "It's okay. I just needed you to know." Before Caleb could respond, Ethan turned and melted into the crowd, his navy gown a blur among the sea of graduates. He didn't look back. By nightfall, he was Ganino note. No goodbye, just a void where Ethan Parker had been. Caleb stood rooted to the spot, the park's noise rushing back like a tidal wave. Ethan's words echoed in his skull, each one a punch he hadn't seen coming. He'd always known Ethan was different, brighter, bolder, the kind of person who made you feel alive just by standing near him. But love? Caleb's mind reeled. He wasn't ready for that. Not with his family's expectations looming. Not with his carefully planned future as a corporate lawyer already mapped out. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and Ethan had just torn them down in seconds. He scanned the crowd, desperate to find Ethan, to say anything to fix this. But Ethan was gone, swallowed by the chaos of graduation day. Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister. "Where are you?" "Mom's waiting." He ignored it, his fingers hovering over Ethan's contact. He typed, deleted, typed again. Nothing felt right. Hours later, when he finally called, Ethan's phone went straight to voicemail. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's absence became a gnawing ache. Caleb checked Ethan's social media, but his accounts were silent. He asked mutual friends, but no one knew where Ethan had gone. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air, leaving only the ghost of his confession behind. Caleb tried to move on, diving into his summer internship at a prestigious law firm. But Ethan's face haunted him, those earnest brown eyes, that trembling voice. Had he misread everything? Had there been a chance for them? One he'd let slip away? By August, Caleb's guilt had hardened into resolve. He couldn't let this be the end. Ethan deserved more than silence. And Caleb needed answers not just for Ethan, but for himself. He started digging, piecing together clues from their shared past. Ethan had always talked about Brooklyn, about a tiny theater where he'd watched his first play as a kid. Maybe that was where he'd gone. Caleb grabbed his jacket and headed for the subway, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know what he'd say when he found Ethan, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting him disappear again. The Brooklyn air was cooler than Manhattan's, tinged with salt from the nearby waterfront. Caleb stepped off the subway at Bedford Avenue, his sneakers scuffing against the cracked pavement. The theater Ethan had once described a rundown gem called the Willow Stage was a 10-minute walk, nestled between a bodega and a thrift shop. Caleb's pulse quickened as he approached the faded marquee, its letters spelling out a play he'd never heard of, Shades of Us. Ethan had always been drawn to stories like that, ones that cracked open the human heart and spilled its secrets. Inside, the theater was dim, its velvet seats worn but warm with history. A rehearsal was underway, actors moving through a scene about love and loss. Caleb scanned the room, half expecting to see Ethan's familiar silhouette in the director's chair. Instead, he found a stagehand, a wiry guy in his 20s, who squinted at Caleb's question about Ethan Parker. "Haven't heard that name," the guy said, scratching his beard. "You sure he's here?" Caleb's stomach sank, but he pressed on, describing Ethan his messy dark hair, his quick laugh, the way he'd light up talking about plays. The stagehand shook his head but pointed Caleb to a bulletin board plastered with flyers. "Check there. People leave notes sometimes." Caleb's eyes darted over the board, landing on a crumpled flyer for a writing workshop dated 2 months ago. In the corner, scrawled in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, was a name and address, Ellie, Red Hook Cafe. The Red Hook Cafe was a cozy, brick-walled spot with mismatched furniture and the smell of fresh coffee. Caleb's hands shook as he pushed open the door, scanning the room for Ethan. Instead, he found Ellie, a barista with bright pink hair and a sharp gaze. She listened as Caleb explained, her expression softening when he mentioned Ethan's name. "Yeah, I know him," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He was here a few weeks ago, helping with a poetry slam. Said he was working on something Bigot play, I think. But he left suddenly. Didn't say where he was going." Caleb's heart twisted. Ethan was slipping through his fingers again. Did he leave anything behind? Anything at all? Ellie hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small notebook. "He forgot this. I didn't open it, felt too personal." Caleb took the notebook, his fingers brushing the worn leather cover. It was Ethan's. No question. He thanked Ellie and stepped outside, flipping it open under a street lamp. The pages were filled with Ethan's thought sketches of characters, snippets of dialogue, and raw, aching poetry. One line hit Caleb like a freight train. "I told him I loved him, and the world ended. Now I'm rebuilding it. Alone." Caleb's throat tightened. Ethan hadn't just vanished. He was running from the pain Caleb had caused. Guilt clawed at him, but so did something else, a flicker of something he hadn't dared name before. Was it possible he felt more for Ethan than he'd admitted to himself? Caleb spent the next week chasing leads. He visited every theater, cafe, and bookshop Ethan had ever mentioned, but the trail was cold. Then, a breakthrough. A friend from their NYU days mentioned seeing Ethan at a queer arts festival in the East Village. Caleb headed there the next day, weaving through colorful booths and performers. At a small poetry tent, he caught a glimpse of someone reading a figure with Ethan's slouch, his intensity. But when Caleb pushed through the crowd, the reader was gone, replaced by a stranger. Desperation crept in. Caleb wasn't just searching for Ethan anymore. He was searching for the part of himself he'd locked away. Growing up in a strict Vietnamese-American family, he'd learned early to bury his feelings, to prioritize duty over desire. Ethan had challenged that, with his fearless heart and unguarded smiles. Caleb realized now how much he'd relied on Ethan's light to guide him, and he'd let it go out. The East Village buzzed with late summer energy, but Caleb felt like he was drowning in it. He clutched Ethan's notebook, its pages now dog-eared from his obsessive reading. Every word was a window into Ethan's soul, his fears, his dreams, his heartbreak. One entry, dated a week after graduation. Read, New York feels too big without him. I'm heading upstate. Maybe forever. Upstate. It was the first real clue Caleb had. He took a train to Hudson, a small town Ethan had once raved about for its quiet charm and artist community. The station was quaint, surrounded by rolling hills and old brick buildings. Caleb wandered the main street, asking locals about a young playwright with dark hair and a shy smile. Most shook their heads, but an older woman at a bookstore paused. Sounds like the kid who was staying at the Miller farm. Helped with their community theater for a bit, then left. Said he needed to find himself or something. The Miller farm was a sprawling property just outside town, with a barn converted into a theater. Caleb arrived as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over fields of wildflowers. A woman in her 50s, Mrs. Miller, greeted him warmly but confirmed Ethan was gone. He was a sweet boy, she said, handing Caleb a program from a recent play. Ethan's name was listed as assistant director. He talked about a friend back in the city. Sounded like he missed him terribly. Caleb's chest ached. He thanked Mrs. Miller and sat on the barn steps, flipping through the program. Tucked inside was a Polaroid of Ethan, laughing with a group of actors. His smile was brighter than Caleb remembered, but his eyes held a shadow. Caleb traced the photo with his thumb, guilt and longing twisting inside him. He'd been so afraid of what Ethan's confession meant that he'd pushed him away. Now, he was chasing a ghost. Back in Hudson, Caleb found a lead at a local diner. A waiter mentioned a group of artists heading to a retreat in the Catskills, and Ethan's name had come up. Caleb didn't hesitate. He rented a car and drove, the winding roads mirroring the chaos in his mind. The retreat was at a secluded lodge, surrounded by pine trees and a glassy lake. When Caleb arrived, the organizer, a lanky man named Sam, recognized Ethan's description. He was here, Sam said. Quiet guy, kept to himself. Left a couple days ago. Said he was going to Albany. Albany. Another city. Another chance. Caleb drove through the night, Ethan's notebook on the passenger seat. He didn't know what he'd say when he found him, but he knew he couldn't stop. In Albany, he checked hostels, theaters, even a community center hosting a pride event. At the event, he spotted a flyer for a new play, Ruinous Love, written by an E. Parker. His heart stopped. It had to be Ethan. The play was being staged in a small black box theater. Caleb bought a ticket, his hands shaking as he took his seat. The lights dimmed, and the stage came alive with a story that felt ripped from his own Lithia tale of two friends. One who loved too fiercely, one too afraid to love back. Caleb's eyes burned with tears as the actor playing the lover poured out his heart, only to vanish in the final act. When the curtain fell, Caleb was on his feet, clapping through his sobs. Ethan wasn't in the cast or crew, but his soul was in every word. The theater emptied, but Caleb stayed, his eyes fixed on the stage where Ethan's story had just unfolded. He approached the director, a woman with kind eyes, and asked about E. Parker. She smiled sadly. Ethan's not here. He sent us the script, but didn't stick around for rehearsals. Said he was heading West Rochester. Maybe. Caleb thanked her, his mind racing. Rochester was hours away, but he was too close to give up now. The drive to Rochester was a blur of highways and self-doubt. Caleb replayed their last moment in the park, cursing himself for his silence. He'd been so caught up in his family's expectations, his father's insistence on a respectable life, that he'd never questioned his own heart. Ethan's confession had forced him to confront the truth. He'd felt something for Ethan, too. Something he'd buried under years of denial. In Rochester, Caleb scoured local theaters and cafes. Ethan's notebook his only anchor. At a small bookstore, he found a flyer for a poetry reading, with Ethan's name listed as a guest reader. His heart leapt. The reading was that night at a cozy venue called the Inkwell. Caleb arrived early, his nerves frayed, and took a seat in the back. When Ethan stepped onto the stage, Caleb's breath caught. He looked different, thinner, his hair longer, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. But his voice, reading a poem about love and loss, was unmistakably Ethan. When the reading ended, Caleb waited outside, his heart pounding. Ethan emerged, head down, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Ethan," Caleb called, his voice cracking. Ethan froze, his eyes meeting Caleb's with a mix of shock and fear. For a moment, neither spoke, the air heavy with everything unsaid. "Caleb, what? What are you doing here?" Ethan's voice was quiet, guarded. "I've been looking for you," Caleb said, stepping closer. "Ever since that day in the park. I messed up, Ethan. I didn't know how to handle what you said, but I can't let you disappear." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "You don't owe me anything, Caleb. I said what I needed to say. You don't have to." "I do," Caleb interrupted, his voice fierce. "I owe you the truth. I was scared. Okay. Scared of what it meant, of what my family would think. But I've spent months chasing you, and I'm done running from this. From us." Ethan's eyes softened, but pain lingered there. "You don't get it. Saying it broke me. I had to leave, to figure out who I am without you. And now you're here, and I don't know if I can do this again." Caleb reached for Ethan's hand, but Ethan pulled back. "Please," Caleb said. "Just talk to me. Don't run again." Ethan hesitated, then nodded, and they walked to a nearby park, sitting on a bench under a starry sky. For hours, they talked about the pain of that day, about Ethan's journey, about Caleb's awakening. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. The Rochester park was quiet. The only sounds the rustle of leaves and their uneven breaths. Ethan sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Caleb leaned forward, desperate to bridge the gap between them. The night air was cool, but the weight of their conversation felt heavier than ever. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Caleb said, his voice low. "I didn't know how to process it. You were always the brave one, Ethan. I was too busy trying to be what everyone else wanted." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Brave. I ran, Caleb. I poured my heart out and then bolted because I couldn't face you saying no. That's not bravery. That's cowardice." "You're wrong," Caleb said fiercely. "You said what I was too afraid to even think. You changed everything." He paused, searching Ethan's face. "I've read your notebook. Every word. It's like I was there with you, feeling it all. I'm so sorry I let you go through that alone." Ethan's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. "You read it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Caleb nodded, pulling the notebook from his bag and handing it back. Ethan took it, his fingers lingering on the cover. I wrote those things to survive, he said, to make sense of losing you. You didn't lose me, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I'm right here. And I'm not leaving until we figure this out. They talked until dawn, peeling back layers of fear and regret. Ethan spoke of his months on the road, of finding solace in writing, of trying to rebuild himself after the confession shattered him. Caleb admitted his own struggles as family's disapproval when he hinted at questioning his path. His growing realization that he'd loved Ethan in ways he hadn't understood. It was messy, raw, and unfinished, but it was real. By morning, they agreed to stay in touch. Ethan was heading to Buffalo for another theater project, and Caleb promised to visit. They parted with a tentative hug, Ethan's warmth lingering on Caleb's skin. For the first time in months, Caleb felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few weeks, they texted daily, rebuilding their connection. Caleb visited Buffalo, watching Ethan direct a small play. Seeing him in his element confident, passionate stirred something deep in Caleb. He began to imagine a future where they didn't have to hide, where he could be honest with himself and the world. But Ethan was cautious, his trust bruised. I want to believe this can work, he told Caleb one night over coffee. But I need time. I need to know you're in this for real. Caleb nodded, determined to prove it. Buffalo's winter was creeping in, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Caleb and Ethan met weekly now, their conversations a delicate dance of rebuilding trust. They'd walk along the Erie Canal, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Ethan's play, Ruinous Love, was gaining traction, with a small theater in Syracuse picking it up. Caleb attended every rehearsal he could, marveling at how Ethan poured his heart into every line. One evening, after a rehearsal, they sat on a pier, the water reflecting the city lights. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, his voice barely audible over the lapping waves. What if we try this and it falls apart? I don't think I can survive losing you again. Caleb took a deep breath, his heart racing. I'm scared too. But I know one thing. I'd rather risk it all than live without you. I love you, Ethan. I think I always have. Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment, Caleb thought he'd run again. But then Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing Caleb's in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and electric. It was their first, and it felt like a promise. They pulled back, breathless, and Ethan smiled a real, unguarded smile. Okay, he whispered. Let's try. Their relationship bloomed slowly, each step a victory. They spent weekends exploring upstate New York, laughing over diner food, and stealing kisses in quiet moments. But challenges loomed. Caleb's family grew suspicious of his frequent trips, and his father confronted him, demanding to know why he was wasting time instead of focusing on his law career. Caleb deflected, but the pressure was mounting. Ethan, too, faced struggles. His play was a hit, but the emotional toll of reliving his pain on stage left him drained. He leaned on Caleb, but old insecurities crept in. What if I'm not enough? He asked one night, curled up in Caleb's apartment. Caleb held him close, whispering reassurances, but he knew they had to face the world together if this was going to last. They decided to return to New York City for the holidays, a test of their new bond. The city felt different now, alive with possibility but heavy with memories. Caleb invited Ethan to meet his sister, Lynn, who'd always been his confidant. Lynn welcomed Ethan warmly, but Caleb knew the real challenge would be his parents. He wasn't ready to come out. Not yet, but he promised Ethan he would when the time was right. Christmas in New York was a whirlwind of lights and chaos. But for Caleb and Ethan, it was a chance to redefine their story. They wandered through Central Park, hand in hand, their breath visible in the cold air. Ethan's play was set to open in a small off-Broadway theater, and Caleb was there every step of the way, helping with rehearsals and cheering Ethan on. But the weight of Caleb's family loomed. At a tense dinner, his father pressed him about his future, dismissing his trips to see Ethan as a distraction. Caleb's resolve wavered, but Ethan's steady presence grounded him. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said, squeezing his hand. "We're in this together." The night of Ethan's play was electric. The theater was packed, and Caleb sat in the front row, his heart swelling with pride. Ruinous Love was a triumph, earning a standing ovation. Afterward, Ethan pulled Caleb backstage, his eyes shining. "This is because of you," he said. "You gave me the courage to write this." Caleb kissed him, not caring who saw. "No, Ethan. This is all you." They celebrated late into the night, surrounded by friends who'd become their chosen family. But the joy was tempered by Caleb's growing dread. He had to tell his parents the truth, or he'd lose Ethan to the weight of his own fear. The next day, Caleb sat his parents down. His mother's face was unreadable, his father's stern. "I'm in love with Ethan," Caleb said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm not hiding it anymore." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. His father stood and left the room without a word. His mother reached for his hand, her eyes soft but sad. "Give him time," she whispered. Caleb walked out, shaken but unbowed. He found Ethan waiting outside, his face full of worry. "How'd it go?" Ethan asked. Caleb pulled him into a hug, burying his face in Ethan's shoulder. "It's gonna be okay," he said, more to himself than to Ethan. "We're gonna be okay." Months passed, and Caleb and Ethan built a life together in New York. Ethan's play toured regionally, earning critical acclaim, while Caleb took a job at a nonprofit law firm, finding purpose in helping others. His relationship with his parents was strained, but his mother began to soften, inviting Ethan to small family gatherings. His father remained distant, but Caleb held on to hope. They moved into a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, filling it with books, laughter, and the quiet comfort of each other's presence. On quiet nights, they'd sit on the fire escape, talking about their dreams, Ethan's next play, Caleb's advocacy work, a future where they could be fully themselves. The pain of that graduation day still lingered, but it had forged them into something stronger. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms bloomed again, Caleb took Ethan back to Washington Square Park. The air was warm, the park alive with new graduates. Caleb stopped under the same cherry tree where Ethan had confessed his love years ago. "I was too scared to say it back then," Caleb said, taking Ethan's hands. "But I'm not anymore. I love you, Ethan Parker, and I want to spend my life with you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but his smile was radiant. "I never stopped loving you," he said, pulling Caleb into a kiss that felt like home. They stood there, wrapped in each other, as petals fell around them. The world had tested them, but they'd emerged whole, their love a testament to courage and redemption. Years later, Ethan's play became a touchstone for queer youth, a story of love that dared to speak its name. Caleb stood by his side, proud and unafraid. They'd vanished from each other once, but they'd found their way back, proving that even a ruinous love could rebuild a life worth living.